Hi, my name's Phyllis, and I'm going to tell you a story about how I became a Baha'i. And the title of this story is If You Have Faith the Size of a Mustard Seed. I was raised in the Methodist Church, and my earliest Methodist memory is of standing in line at Vacation Bible School waiting for snacks. And every single day they gave us the same snack. They gave us graham crackers, which I adored, and they gave us grapefruit juice straight, which I hated. It just made my face squinch up and my eyes get all weird. My most tactile Methodist memory, I would say, was of a bracelet that I was awarded when I was about 10 years old for never missing Sunday school. Every single week I had been there. And this bracelet was a gold chain, and it had this round plastic globe on it. And inside this plastic globe was a mustard seed. And they had given that to us to remind us that Jesus had told his disciples, if you have faith like a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you. And I used to feel this round plastic ball. I'd lie in my bed at night and I would feel it, and there were no seams, there were no holes, and I couldn't figure out how the heck did they get that mustard seed inside of there. It was a puzzle to me. My funniest Methodist memory is singing in the church choir when I was quite young under the direction of Mrs. Hicks, our choir director. She was quite a buxom lady. And Mrs. Hicks had decided that the thing we should do in choir was to stand like little angels, and that meant putting our hands at our waists. And the only trouble is we were little angels and our arms would get really tired, and about halfway through the hymn, they would start to sag. And so in order to remind us of the proper posture, Mrs. Hicks would, while she was somehow directing the choir, would put her own hands at her waist, which was mostly hidden under her ample bosom, and then she would jerk her hands up and down violently to remind us to pull ours up, which of course had the unintended effect of making us laugh so that we couldn't finish the song. My most emotional Methodist memory was of Easter weekends when I was a teenager, particularly. Easter had very deep meaning for me, and I would, on Friday, on Good Friday, when Christ had been crucified, I would weep. And then on Saturday, I would hang around the house all day. I didn't know what to do with myself. I just felt up in the air. And then on Sunday morning, on Easter morning, I would wake up just relieved and full of joy that Christ had risen. I remember that feeling very clearly, and I remember the Easter hymn, and I still know the Easter hymn, all of the words to it, and I sing it sometimes, and it still gives me goosebumps. However, when I was in high school, I started having some questions and some things that confused me. And I was in my senior year of high school, and we had a young adult Sunday school class. And what was happening was that the teacher was telling us one week that God loved everybody, made everybody, and loved everybody. But then the following week there'd be a different lesson, and that lesson would say, well, God only accepts some people, and other people he doesn't accept. This made no sense to me at all. And I remember asking my Sunday school teacher, I said, what is this about? I don't understand. And he told me, he said, you're not supposed to understand. You're supposed to accept this on faith. Well, I knew all about faith. I had that mustard seed bracelet. But I also knew that God had given me a rational mind. And I thought, why wouldn't he want me to use it? Why would he want me to believe something that didn't make any sense to me? And so that year when I left for college, I officially withdrew from the Methodist Church, and I set out on a journey to find a spiritual community that answered these questions for me. And oddly enough, the way I found my path was through an incident that involved race, which ended up being the passion and the work of my life. So I was on campus, and I want to say before I talk about that I grew up in this suburb of Chicago that was, at the time that I grew up, 99% or 99, maybe 0.8% white. And I know there were 2 black families in my town because they had sons that went to my high school, but I had never spoken with either one of those students. And in fact, when I went to college in 1967, I had never had a conversation with anybody who was of African descent. So I get down to college and I become suddenly intensely interested in this African-American student named Joseph. I couldn't talk to him. I was afraid to talk to him, but I watched him. And we worked together in the cafeteria where we washed dishes and we sorted silverware to help pay for our tuition. And Joseph was an unselfconscious singer, and he had a rich, mellow voice. And he would sing, and his voice would kind of drift through the steam that came out of the dishwashing machine where he stood. He would like put these dishes into these big racks and set them on the conveyor belts, and the steam would billow out. And I'm a singer too, and his voice just drew me. But the attraction wasn't enough to overcome my panic at the thought of talking to him. It was actually my curiosity that finally pulled me out of this paralysis at the silverware sorting station and pulled me over to the place where he was loading dishes into the dishwasher. You see, I'd been watching him on campus since I got there. And the thing that Joseph did that nobody else did was he created these little pockets of diversity everywhere he went. I would watch him walking around the quad, and there would be black students and white students walking with him, and I didn't see anybody else doing this. In fact, on the campus, people were just kind of self-segregated. And I couldn't figure out why he was able to do this when nobody else could. And so finally one day, I walked over to the machine, and he was standing up on a platform to load the dishes, which made him quite tall. And I looked up to him, and I kind of gulped, and I said, okay, I want to know how you are different. And he looked down at me, and he smiled. I remember it as though it was yesterday. Smiled through the steam, of course. And he said, oh, I've been watching you, watch me, and I've been waiting for you to ask. And that was embarrassing. But he didn't focus on my embarrassment, he focused on my question. And he said, if I'm different, it's because I'm a Baha'i. And I said, what is that? And he proceeded to tell me what a Baha'i was, that a Baha'i is someone who believes in Baha'u'llah, and that Baha'is believe in the oneness of God and in the oneness of religions and the oneness of humanity. And there was this click. I heard something that I had been unconsciously listening for all of my life, maybe since the mustard seed bracelet, or maybe even since the grapefruit juice. And so I started going to Baha'i meetings, and I was very attracted to the teachings, and I was very attracted to the followers, but I still had this conundrum because I loved Christ, and I believed that Christ was the Son of God. And I thought, how can I believe that Christ is the Son of God, but belong to a religion that was founded by somebody else? And so one day, I remember very clearly, we were walking to my sociology class. Joseph was walking me to class, and I asked him, probably for the 100th time, about this question of mine. How could this be? I don't know if I can divide myself like that. And Joseph told me something he'd told me before, I'm sure. He told me about progressive revelation, about how God reveals himself progressively throughout the ages through these special chosen ones. And these are people like Moses and Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus the Christ, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah. And that these people bring the same spiritual teaching, that the eternal spiritual teachings that the ones before had brought, but that they bring social teachings that are specifically designed for humanity at that stage. And that Baha'u'llah's teachings were about oneness, the elimination of prejudice, the equality of men and women, and concepts like that. And, even though he told me this before, this time I heard it differently. It was as if I'd lived all of my life under a barrel of some kind, and suddenly this barrel was being lifted off my head, and I was just blinded by the light of day. And so that was the moment when my logical mind rejoiced. And I felt once again, as I had on Easter Sunday, I felt this relief because I knew that I could have faith and my logical mind would be satisfied as well. And so my mustard seed sized faith swelled to become the force that would carry me through the rest of my life. And to this very day, I find the Baha'i faith and the teachings of Baha'u'llah to be the thing that give me purpose and guidance and the connection to the divine that keeps me going. And my daily prayer is that God will continue to confirm me through his strengthening grace, to allow my faith to grow, and to allow me to do this work of bringing together all of his children into one human family.